We lost a day to good weather. And as a consequence of that, I have started to become a little worried about the midterm. Okay? The midterm is scheduled for next week. And like probably the hardest thing in this class, we start today. So I've decided to delay the midterm by one day. It's scheduled for Friday of next week, and I think instead we'll do it on Wednesday of the week that follows. Unless someone here objects. Does anyone here object to this? Okay, so this will rearrange slightly the material that we'll go through, and I'll talk to you about that next week when it becomes more clear what will happen. All right, so the midterm, you'll see, is delayed by one day. That's reflected on the web page. Okay, are there any questions or remarks? Maybe questions about the homework that's due this week? We've been looking at the relationship between what it is you've learned about how a word sounds and what it is you do when you speak those words. On the one hand, you've got in your mind memorized a sort of pattern of sounds that make a word. Those sounds we now call phonemes. Yeah? And on the other hand, you have like a system of rules that constitute what it means to have, well, an English accent, or the accent that characterizes your particular speech. And those rules tell you how, for every word that's in your head, how that melody of phonemes should actually be pronounced. So on the one hand, and this is how we started, you know something about how those phonemes get grouped into syllables. You know where to put the pauses among them. And on the other hand, and this is what we learned last time, you know that some of those phonemes get pronounced slightly differently depending on where they are in a word. You know which allophones, to use the technical term, which allophones to use for any given phoneme. This week we're going to learn more about that, and in particular I'm going to introduce to you a series of techniques for discovering, for any given language, of the sounds that that language has, which are phonemes and which are allophones. That's our project for this week. And today's homework assignment, which you'll see on the web page, tests that ability. So let me show you some of the questions on that homework assignment. The answers probably won't be reachable by you until Friday's lecture, though we'll see how far I get today. There are 4 questions. All of them make use of something that you'll see posted on the website for Friday's lecture. What you'll see posted there is a handout that tells you, for every sound that we'll be looking at, for every phone, what the relevant properties that go into making up those sounds, what the relevant properties are for those sounds for these sorts of rules that we'll be talking about this week. Those properties are things that are familiar to you already when you learn these sounds, like, for instance, being voiced or not being voiced, being nasal or not being nasal for a vowel, being tense or not being tense. Okay? These are the sorts of properties that we'll be talking about this week. We call those properties of sounds that are relevant for these sorts of rules that we'll be looking at this week, features. And all of these questions, all of the questions on this homework assignment, test your knowledge of these features and how to use them. And that includes this first question. So what I've done here in the first question is I've given you 5 lists of sounds, and for each one of these lists there will be one feature, so one of these properties, that all these sounds except for one have. And I want you to find that feature, that property. So for instance, Here's a list of sounds. Ta, da, ga, ba, ma. Okay. What do all these sounds except one have in common? Well, this da, ga, ba, and ma. These sounds are all voiced, and this one isn't. So, being voiced would be one property that's shared by all but one of these sounds. That would be an answer. This sound is nasal, ma, and these aren't. So, being not nasal would be a property as well, that all these sounds have, but this one doesn't. So if I were to give you this list, there would be two possible answers to the question I'm posing here. Is it clear what I'm asking for here? So for each one of these lists, I want you to find that property, that feature, that all these sounds except for one has. Tell me that property, and tell me which sound is left out from this list. Okay? Question 1. All the other questions are questions about languages where you have to discover something. So let me show them to you. What I'm asking here will be a little clearer after today's lecture. Question 2, I give you a series of words from Japanese. Okay. These are totally cool words in Japanese. When you go to Japan, make sure you have learned these words. This one in particular, because I want someone to write back to me and tell me what is tummy breathing. I have no idea. But it was the longest word I could find. Okay. There are some sounds here that we don't have in English, but Japanese does. Let me just point out a few of them. So this sound here at the beginning of tsukan, this is a za sound. And this sound here at the beginning of tsuku, this is a tsa sound. These are two affricates that are sort of like putting da and za in the first case, or ta and sa in the second case, together into one sound. Okay? These sounds are exactly like ta and da, except they're not stops. Okay? And then there are these vowels with, you maybe can't see that on the slide, but there's a little circle under some of these vowels. That little circle means the vowel above me is voiceless. So this here is not oo, but oo. And this here is not e, but e. Okay? So this is kikuchi. Kikuchi. Yeah, with voiceless vowels. The voiceless vowels are allophones of voiced vowels. And what I want you to do is find the rule in Japanese that turns the voiced vowels into the voiceless ones. So you have to figure out what's the pattern, where are the voiceless vowels, and then give me that rule. Okay? That's what this question is about. As I said, you'll know how to do that after today's lecture. Is it clear what I'm asking for here then? So an answer to this question is a rule. More Japanese words in the third question. And here too, we have a sound that isn't found in English. It's this sound here. I taught you this sound, I think, when we learned the IPA. This is a voiceless bilabial fricative. It's the sound. Okay? It's what you do with hot food. Well, Japanese has decided to make that a sound. So the word for this thing in Japanese is tofu. Not tofu, but tofu. Okay? And this thing here in Japanese is futon. Probably actually futan, but not futon. Okay? I want you to compare that sound with this sound. And I want you to see if from this list of words you can deduce whether these two sounds are phonemes in Japanese or if one is an allophone of the other. If you decide that they're phonemes, tell me why. Tell me what the evidence is. And if you decide they're allophones, give me the rule that turns one of these sounds into the other in the place where the other is found. Okay. Ma'am?
Can you just reiterate the difference between phoneme and
Yeah, I'll do that this whole lecture. Okay? Yeah, don't worry. Yeah. This is just to scare you into paying attention. That's the point of the everything, my whole life, basically. Yeah. Okay, and the last question, it's exactly the same thing as the one we just looked at in Japanese, except it's a question not about Japanese, but about German. So these are all words from German. And German, too, has a sound that we don't have. This is okay? Yeah. That's like when you have a fur ball and it's a really big one. It's exactly like g, only it's not a stop, it's a fricative. So it's pronounced exactly like g, but instead of making a closure at the velar ridge, at the velum with your tongue, you make frication there. So this is waren. This asterisk thing means that this vowel is held a little bit longer. Okay? So it's but it's not it's waren. Yes, they laugh at me in Germany. And also, Germans have a vowel we don't have, which is this one here. This is just A. It's exactly that vowel A, except the lips are rounded. So it's A. A. It's very important to do the hand gesture. Otherwise they won't understand you. Okay? Yes, that's what this is. Okay? Great. And I ask you to compare ga and ha and see if from this word list you can discover, are these two phonemes, ga, ha, in German, or is one an allophone of the other? And the same thing, if you think they're phonemes, tell me what the evidence is. If you think they're allophones, then tell me the rule. What gets turned into what and where? Okay? All these rules you give me should be in terms of these phonological features that I'll be teaching you this week. All right? So that's the purpose of this week, is to teach you how to do these questions. Is there any remarks? Do you want me to say something more about the homework assignment? It's due a week from today, next Wednesday. Great. All right. So, now finally I'll answer your question. What's all this I hear about phonemes? Well, we discovered last time that there are sounds in English that you may not have been aware of, but they are present, and they're different. They're distinct sounds, and they have a particular place for their existence. Some days I'm awake, and then there are days like today. And here's an instance. This ta at the beginning of the word till, this ta, the beginning of the word till, is different than this ta here at the beginning of the word still. This one has a little puff of air. That's what this raised H indicates. And we say that it's aspirated. Remember, we did the till, still. Okay? Till, little puff of air. Still, nothing at all. Yep. So we have these aspirated tas. And we also have aspirated pas. So at the beginning of pill, that pa is a little bit different than the pa that's at the end of up, or at the beginning of spill. Right? Pill, pit, those pas are aspirated, but these others are not. And then finally we saw the same thing for ka. There's an aspirated ka as well. Kill. It's different than the kas spoken in ik and skill. Those are unaspirated. Okay. If you don't say ta, pa, and ka with aspiration in the places where you're supposed to, you'll stop sounding like an English speaker. And you'll start sounding like someone who doesn't speak English but is really trying. Yeah? So, instead of till, if you said till, right? You are French. Yeah? And if you say not kill, but kill, right? What's going on over here? It's like we're in church, and you are the bad girls. Yeah, and we're not in church. Oh, I don't know. It's supposed to be now. Yeah, and same thing with pill. Okay, so part of making these words sound like English is knowing when you should aspirate and when you shouldn't. It's like a circus today. Okay. And when we look at all these words, we see a pattern. And the pattern is every one of these pa, tas, and kas is unaspirated, except for those that are at the beginnings of onsets, like these are, or these are, or these are. Right? Return, repair, incur. Those are all aspirated too. Okay. The fact of the matter is, ladies and gentlemen, when you say words, part of your I am an English speaker machine tells you aspirate patanka when they're at the beginnings of onsets. That's part of what it means to speak with an English accent. There's a rule. And we call these aspirated stops allophones of the unaspirated stops. That rule creates these allophones. Importantly, and this, we'll see how this works in a moment, this rule does not take individual sounds and say, well, when you say this sound in such and such a place, change it a certain way. No, instead what it does, it's really a rule that's looking at what's going on in your mouth when you make these sounds. And it's saying, when you do this and this thing, do this too in a certain place. So in this instance, when you make a stop and your vocal cords are not flapping, add aspiration, this little puff of air, if you're doing those two other things at the beginning of an onset. Okay? And as a consequence, all of the voiceless stops of English get aspirated. Patanka. If you were to learn a new voiceless stop tomorrow, that one would get aspirated at the beginnings of onsets, because this rule would kick in and treat that one like it does every other voiceless stop. Sir?
Is aspiration common in most languages?
Aspiration is indeed very common, but interestingly, it's treated differently from language to language. So whereas in English, aspiration is a property that makes these allophones, and like voicing, for instance, is not a property that makes allophones. We do not have in English a rule that says, make a voiceless stop voiced in such and such a place. Da is not an allophone of ta, for instance. Yeah. So, aspiration is a property that makes allophones. Voicing is a property that doesn't make allophones. But in other languages, aspiration is just as significant as voicing is, say, in English. So in Thai, Thai has aspirated pas and tas, but to a Thai speaker, an aspirated pa sounds as different from an unaspirated pa as, say, ba sounds to us as different from pa. We can see this in Thai. Oh, we had a Thai speaker here. Do we have a Thai speaker here? We could ask, if we had one, we would go to them and say, is pa and pa, are they the same sound? And they would say, no. Just like if I went to you and said, is ta and da the same? Are they the same sounds? You would say, no. One's ta and one's da. Thai speakers treat aspirated pa as different from unaspirated pa as we do, say, ba from pa. And we can see that too in the words they have. So for instance, this word ba means forest. This word pa is the verb that means spill. This word dam, no, that's not quite right. This word dam, hard for me to say it, means pound. And this word tam means do. Yeah. You know, like these just sound like words that aren't English to us because I'm saying a voiceless stop without aspiration at the beginning of an onset. In Thai, these are different words. They sound different to Thai speakers because one has an aspirated stop where the other doesn't. These are minimal pairs. This is a sign that aspirated pa and unaspirated pa are different phonemes in Thai, and not, as in English, allophones. Sir?
You answered my question.
Are we clear with this? Sort of? Okay. So, we're going to learn today and on Friday how to determine, given evidence from a language, when two or more sounds in that language are being used by speakers of that language as allophones or as phonemes. Right. And here's one important tool. When you look, the easiest thing to do is to get a speaker of that language to nail them down in a chair and then to ask them questions. Does this sound different than this? Are these two sounds the same or different? And, before they expire, you get answers from them, you will know everything you need to know. Right? But if you don't have a speaker or nails, then what you have to do is figure out, which of these sounds are allophones and which are phonemes through deduction. And here's one important tool. So if we could find a set of words from some language and find in that set of words two words, like these two say, that differ only with respect to one sound, we would have evidence that these two sounds are phonemes. These words, if they sound different to Thai speakers, must sound different because this sounds different from this. Yeah. If they can hear the difference in those sounds, those are phonemes. That's what it means to be a phoneme. No?
I got confused.
Just now?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll do this 3 more times, okay? If by the 3rd time it hasn't gotten better, stand up, give me a kick, and then tell me to do it again. Except without the kick. Now, what would be evidence that two sounds groups of sounds are allophones? Well, let's go back. Like if we look, if we were not English speakers and we were confronted with the task of figuring out, is pa, that's aspirated pa, an allophone or a different phoneme from pa, that's the unaspirated pa? How would we figure that out if we didn't have an English speaker around to ask? We could look at these words and discover a pattern. The pattern is that the aspirated pa, tas, and kas are in a place in these words where the unaspirated pa, tas, and kas are never found. Beginnings of onsets. Right? That's what will always happen if one sound or a group of sounds is an allophone of another sound or a group of sounds. There will be some rule that turns the phoneme into the allophone in some place. And so if you look at all the words, you'll only see the allophone in that place, and you'll never see the phoneme in that place. Okay. That's the clue that these two sounds are in an allophonic relationship. Are we so far okay? So let's do it. Let's look at German. Here are some words from German. Oh, I have my back to the camera. And now you'll get my back again. So this is the word for book. And you'll see it ends with a sound that we don't have in English. This is ha. It's a voiceless velar fricative. It's exactly like ka, except it's not a stop. It's a fricative. This is for the mini hairball problem. Okay? So this is buh. Okay? This is the word for me. And it ends with a sound that also English doesn't have. This is okay. It's just a country of cats. So that's an angry one. Yeah? This also is a fricative. It's made by taking the tongue and moving it towards the roof of the mouth. Okay? So this is the word mich. Okay? Kochen, Bach, Mädchen, Kuchen, Milch, and so on. Right? So, from this list of words in German, well, we know what sounds there are in German, at least partly. There's U and B and these two freaky fricatives. But now, what we have to do is figure out, well, of those sounds, which are allophones of others, and which are phonemes. So let's start by asking, for these two fricatives that German has that English doesn't, hya and cha, are these allophones or are they phonemes? Do German speakers hear and as different sounds? Or do they hear one of them as the way you say the other in a certain place? That's what the question is. Are they different phonemes? What do we look for? What would be evidence that these two sounds are different phonemes? You don't know. So, if these two sounds are heard as being different, what we would want, and that's what it means for them to be phonemes, what we would want is to find a clue, a sign, that these two sounds really are heard as being different by German speakers. So what would that sign be? If we found two words that were exactly the same, except one has one of these sounds where the other has the other sound. If there are two words that only differ with respect to these sounds, then we could deduce, well, if German speakers hear those two things as different, they must be able to hear those particular phones as different, as that's the only thing that's different in them. Right? For instance, in English, we know that pa and ba are different phonemes, at least in part because we can make two words that sound exactly the same, except one has a pa where the other has a ba. Tap and tab. Okay. See how they're exactly the same? They sound different to you because the last sound is different. You hear that difference? That's what it means to be a phoneme. So are there any two words in this list from German where one that are exactly the same, except one has a h, sorry about that, and the other has a hya? There aren't. All the words in this list differ by more than one sound. There are no two words like mich and mich, which are exactly the same, except one has hya where the other has cha. There's no clue from this word list, then, that these two sounds are different phonemes. We looked for the evidence. We didn't find it. We've learned nothing about German. We now ask, well, okay, is there any evidence that one of these sounds is an allophone of the other? So what we're asking then is there in this language, for instance, a rule? I mean, it could be like this, right? It could be that German speakers have this sound, the velar voiceless fricative, and they also have a rule that tells them, well, sometimes you should pronounce as okay. Right? So, it could be like this. Somewhere there's a rule of that sort in the German mind. Or it could go the other way around. It could be that German speakers have in their head hya, but they've also got a rule that says sometimes hya should be pronounced as h. That's what it would mean for one of these sounds to be an allophone of the other. So what would be a sign of one of these two rules? What would we look for? Well, if there is a rule, either one of these, then there will be some place where one of these sounds turns into the other. So there will be some place in these words where you get the sound that the rule is making, and you never get the sound that this sound is being made from. Right? That's what we look for. So we try to see, is there a pattern to where ha and hya is? Is there some place where you get one of those that you don't get the other? That's what you look for. Of course, knowing what to look for means knowing, well, what does it mean, place in a word? Like what do you look for? In the case of the aspiration rule, what we should have looked for, if we were looking, was, are you at the beginning of an onset or not? If we had looked, well, can you be at the beginning of an onset, we would have found the aspirated stops there and the unaspirated stops never there. Okay? So part of being a good phonologist is knowing, when asking this question, is one an allophone of another, what to look for. Where inside words should we expect to find a rule turning a sound into its allophone? That's hard. It takes, weeks and weeks to learn how to do that. Much more time than I have to teach you anything. So for this class, I will make a sort of simplified artificial world. In our simplified artificial world, if there is a rule making an allophone, that rule will only apply changing one sound into its allophone based on sounds that are right next to it. Okay? So what does it mean to look for, do you find one sound in a place in a word that you don't find the other? Well, what you look for is, look at the sounds that come immediately before. So in our case, what we're going to do is we're going to look and see what sounds can come immediately before ha, what sounds can come immediately before hya. Is there a rule that turns this into this based on the sound that comes right before it? You should also look at what sound comes immediately after. And you should also look to see, does it matter what sounds surround some sound? So there could be a rule that will turn something into something else based on being surrounded by a kind of sound. Okay. Well, maybe this is easier to see if we do it. Right, so let's go back to our German words, and now let's ask, is there evidence that ha turns into hya or hya into ha based on the kind of sound that's near it? That evidence would consist in finding that the class of sounds that come before or after one of the ha-hya pair never comes before or after the other of the ha-hya pair. So let's see what we find. What are the sounds that follow ha? You should sit in the front from now on. I like picking on you. So tell me, what are the sounds you see following this sound? Schwa and the ta. Anything else? Nothing. There's also just silence following the ha, right? So let's keep track of that too. So what are the things we find following ha? The schwa, ta, and let's use that symbol to indicate silence. Okay. Great. What do we see following hya? Oh, I know. I'll pick on you. What do we see following hya? Yeah. This sound. And what else? This vowel, A, and silence, right? Okay. So, what do we discover? Following ha can be ta, schwa, or silence, and following hya can be a, silence, or schwa. So, both of these can be followed by silence or by a schwa. Well, there couldn't be a rule then that turned ha into hya or hya into ha based on the kind of sound that follows. Because if there was, these lists would have nothing in common. If there was, one of these would transform into the other when schwa, a, or silence followed. We wouldn't expect to find ha followed by a schwa and hya also followed by a schwa, because if there was a rule turning one of these into the other, one of these would not be followed by schwa. It would have been converted to the other. Too bad. No sign that there's a rule turning one into the other based on the sounds that follow. Sir?
So in English, are the phones A and allophones of each other? Like after?
Yes. So the question is the schwa an allophone of A, the vowel A? And the answer is a long answer. The answer is yes and no. Yes, because A does turn into and no, because other things turn into Yeah. All right. Now we need to look at the sounds that come before. So we didn't find any evidence that there's a rule turning one of these into the other based on the sounds that follow. So now let's see if a certain kind of sound coming before is triggering a rule that converts one of these into the other. So what do we see coming before ha? What sounds? You're not shy. I know you're not shy. I've seen your Facebook pages. So, sir, what do you see coming before ha? Yeah. Is that it? Yeah. Great. And what do we see coming before hya? Sir, your hat's on backwards. I don't know if you know. Yeah. E. D. This is all, yeah. A. Nothing. Bingo. The sounds that come before ha and hya are never the same. That's exactly what we would find if there indeed was a rule that turned one of these into the other when a certain kind of sound came before it. Right? We would expect to find that this rule would create the allophone where this set of sounds is, and the phoneme that the allophone is being created from would never be found, therefore, after those sounds. Do you see that? So, I mean, of course, it could just be an accident. There's only 10 words in this list. So it's not like statistically significant if we find, that we don't always find the same sounds coming before one and the other. In fact, what we should do is look at maybe 2,000 words. Usually a vocabulary of a person is around 5,000 words. So if we look at 2,000 or 3,000 words, we'd probably get a representative sample. if you would like, if it would make you feel better, every time I give you a problem like this, I will give you 2,500 words to look at. But if you would prefer not doing that, I will never lie to you with the 10 words I choose. Okay? So, I promise what we see from these 10 words is what would be true if we looked at thousands. These two are allophones. So here's what could be happening. It could be that hya is the phoneme, and it turns into ha. Where? Well, where we see the has after u, o, or a. Hya is never preceded by u or a because it always becomes ha. Ha is always preceded by u, o, and a because that's where the rule makes it. That's one possibility. The other possibility goes just the other way around. It might be that ha is the phoneme. And hya is the way you say ha if you're German. There's a rule, turning ha into ch. Ugh. I am so phlegmy. Yeah? And where does that rule apply? Well, it kicks in where we see the hyas. Hyas are found after e, de, u, a, and silence, and ha never is. Could be one of these two rules. Do you see how we got that far? Are you okay? You have to do this millions of times. So, you should stop me. One of these two. Now we have to figure out which. Oh, so here's the setup. Let me just... So what Rule A says is that all the German words actually have hya in them. And the rule creates ha out of some of those. Whereas the other setup says that all German words have ha in them instead. And the rule is making the hyas. Okay. So now, how can we choose between those two rules? Both of those rules will describe the pattern we see. Here they are, again. All right, now is the time to remember the aspiration rule in English. So remember the aspiration rule in English. Remember what I told you about it. What that rule does is it tells English speakers something about what they should do with their mouth when they're making sounds. That rule says if you're going to make a closure, a stop, and it's voiceless, your vocal folds aren't flapping, if you do those two things, then add aspiration if you're at the beginning of an onset. This rule does not say if you're saying pa, aspirate it at the beginning of an onset. Instead, what it's trying to do is say, aspirate any voiceless stop, pa, tang, ka. Anything that involves those two articulations, change slightly when you're at the beginning of an onset. These rules always behave that way. They do not make reference to sounds. They are rules about the underlying articulations in those sounds. They are rules that say, if your mouth is doing this somewhere, then do this too. Okay? So, these rules should really say something like, well, if you're making a palatal fricative, move your tongue back so that you're making instead a velar fricative when you are following whatever it is these sounds have in common. Whenever you are following a sound that's being made in the way that oo, o, and ah are. Or by contrast, if this rule is right, what it should really say is, when you're making a velar fricative, move your tongue forward a little bit, make a palatal fricative, and do that whenever you've just finished doing whatever you're doing when you make those things. Do you see? Well, what is your mouth doing when it's making those things. Your tongue moves forward, you're making a lax vowel. Your tongue moves, touches the alveolar ridge, your vocal folds vibrate, your nose is closed, you make an alveolar non-nasal voiced stop. It's just like D, except the tongue sides are down. A, you move the tongue forward, you tense. What is common to those four sounds? Jack shit is the technical term. Nothing is common to them. Moreover, silence. You do nothing when you make silence. Silence has nothing in common with a sound. This couldn't be the rule. There's no way of saying it. Do you see why? We'd have to say, make ha, hya when you what? Make a, d, or nothing at all. It's just a random collection of sounds and non-sounds. By contrast, what do these guys have in common? Well, they're all vowels. So maybe the rule could say, make hya, ha, when you've just finished saying a vowel. Would that be right? No, because, we've seen that a vowel can also precede hya. So we don't want hya to turn into ha after every vowel. We don't want it to turn into ha after I or a. So, what makes oo, o, or ah similar and different from I and a? So let's think. In I and a, your tongue moves forward, it neither raises nor lowers. For oo, your tongue moves back, raises, and you round your lips. For o, your tongue moves back, you round the lips. And for ah, the tongue moves back and a little bit lower, and you don't round the lips. It looks like when your tongue moves back to make a vowel, hya becomes ha. Do you see? In fact, think about this rule. This rule is saying when you're making a palatal fricative and you've just finished making a vowel that brings the tongue back, leave the tongue back there and make a velar fricative instead. That's our rule. More on Friday.